So there appears to be some controversy going on with Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk. This might be like the first time that people are kind of questioning his credibility. So it's a pretty interesting situation. Now, Kyle has made it no secret that he's super big on Marianne Williamson for president, the candidate. And that is completely fine and completely clear. Now, it's very questionable in terms of like, he genuinely believes, I don't know if he still believes this now, but he did verbatim say this very seriously, by the way, that he genuinely thought that Marianne Williamson could win. Now, after the race, after her campaign was launched and I saw she was hitting 10%, I thought that she would make more of a splash. But it seems like her strategy seems to be entirely based on TikTok, which isn't a terrible strategy if you're trying to gain votes. But I feel like in this situation, you're not really trying to garner votes specifically, but more so attention and like coverage of your campaign. So her strategy just seems to be, I'm disappointed in terms of I'm not a Marianne Williamson fan. I don't even support her. But just from kind of like a political, analysis perspective, right? I'm disappointed in what she's doing. But Kyle Kulinski's objectivity and credibility is being called into question here because apparently Marianne Williamson actually officiated his wedding, and then Kyle and Krystal, I believe, were actually at Marianne Williamson's campaign launch. So there's like some kind of like very inter kind of connection going on between them behind the scenes. Now, this is obviously interesting because Kyle kind of has made his career on being the outsider. Now, so what he is now is he's no longer a full outsider. He's now an insider outsider or an outside insider. So it's like he's on the outside. Obviously, Marianne Williamson is not like part of the establishment or anything. But so she's on the outside, but he's now on the inside of the outside. And so this kind of does beg the question in terms of like, is this something that kind of compromises his credibility? And it's an interesting question. And so this person on the Secular Talk subreddit says this got a lot of attention. It says, Kyle can't objectively cover Marianne Williamson after she officiated his wedding. Is anyone else disappointed with how Kyle is covering Marianne Williamson? After Marianne Williamson officiated his wedding, it's clear he's letting his personal fondness for her affect his ability to objectively cover her. There's a huge conflict of interest. Kyle correctly, in my opinion, mocks irrelevant GOP candidates' odds of winning like Chris Christie and Mike Pence, who have a 0% chance of winning the GOP nomination, yet relentlessly criticize anyone who treats Marianne Williamson the same way. Marianne Williamson ran for Congress in my district in 2014 and ended up in 4th place. Her 2020 campaign was also a bust. She has no chance, and it's sad Kyle can't see this. And then he had to edit in there saying, edit, I have no problem with Kyle being friends with Marianne or letting her officiate his wedding. My issue is that it seems like Kyle is super hesitant to criticize Marianne because of this. Kyle totally could call her out on all of her woo-woo spiritual stuff. Random example, thinking clinical depression isn't real or her other flaws, but doesn't. So there's kind of a lot of stuff going on here, right? So the one thing we should make, because there's a lot of like kind of correlations and causations being like sort of inferred here. But the main thing here is that I want to establish first is, if Kyle is very open about saying, hey, I support Marianne Williamson for president, that's completely fine. And that's obviously going to impact his coverage, obviously, because that's who he supports. But he's being honest, and that's his lens, that's his view. And that's ultimately what you go to Kyle for. You don't go for some kind of a neutrality thing. You go for a coverage of politics through his lens, right? His sort of very specific progressive lens. And I think people are kind of having this question because this is the first time Kyle is in a situation where he really has these personal ties. Now, even with Justice Democrats, he did have like somewhat ties, but it was very loose, and he kind of just set up the org and then other people were running it, so it wasn't the same thing in terms of being so kind of interconnected. And so Kyle is like, if Cenk Uygur was doing this, for example, if Cenk had Marianne Williamson officiate his wedding, like I don't think anybody would really care, because although his brand is very much like being like, against like establishment politics or whatever, he's much more down to be like an insider than Kyle is. Again, Kyle's entire brand is kind of built on this entire thing of being this political outsider, and that's what he was. And now this has gone away. And so I think people are understandably kind of like, hey, what exactly is going on here? Now, there's this sort of inference that because, of this personal relationship, he's not calling her out. I would say it's very obvious and clear that Kyle does not call out his friends. He's openly stated that he has a difficulty doing so. Anybody he has personal relationships with, it does impact his media coverage. However, I would just personally say that I don't think that this is any evidence that his coverage is being impacted in this way. I'm sure it has some level of impact. I would say it would be impossible for it not to. But I just do believe that I don't think that this is the reason why, he is, making fun of Chris Christie and Mike Pence for having no chance of winning. And then because I looked at the polls, like Mike Pence, I don't know about Chris, I didn't even see Chris Christie really like hitting the numbers, but Pence is at about the same level as Marianne Williamson, pretty much polling around 5% consistently. And so that is like, it's not consistent. However, I don't think that's because, she officiated his wedding. I think that's just because he loves Marianne Williamson and wants her to win. And so he's using motivated reasoning. It's a concept in political science. It's like, you're not coming from it from like an objective point of view. You have a desired goal. You want Marianne Williamson to be taken seriously, be president of the United States, etc. So you're going to come to a reasoning through a motivated lens of, I want this person to do better. And so you're going to make fun of Chris Christie and Mike Pence for having dog shit numbers and not Marianne Williamson, not because she officiated your wedding, but because you want her to win. Now, again, I would say it probably has some impact on it, but I would just say personally that I think that this kind of inference is just weak in general. I wouldn't say that this is the reason. I think it's more of a reverse kind of causation. I think that she officiated his wedding because he likes her so much, if that makes sense, right? I think it's kind of a reverse thing. Although I would say, honestly, his love for Marianne Williamson is so bizarre and random that there does appear to be potential for this. Now, the reason why he's obviously going down this route, a lot of people attribute a lot of Kyle's new stuff to Krystal Ball. I don't usually see the connection there, but this one is definitely true. One thing about Krystal Ball is she's very, very much an insider, right? She has all these various connections, so she's able to get on Bill Maher's show. She had an MSNBC show. She had like some weird like pact that a lot of people criticized her for, saying you spent much of the money, like more money than you even spent on candidates. And so you could definitely that's definitely for sure the reason why they're like so inside. And so I think it does kind of compromise Kyle's sort of coverage of the election. Now, I want to explain that. I should have explained this earlier, but there's a huge difference between being like, hey, I support Marianne Williamson, and so my coverage is going to be biased in that direction, which is totally fine because we're coming to you for your lens, and that's what you believe, that's what we want to hear. But once you start having personal connections with these people, there are certain bennies that come with that, right? So you have a presidential candidate officiating your wedding. A lot of people like the elitism that comes along with it, the media coverage, maybe you have the private dinners and all this other stuff, limousines, whatever. All of these things compromise you because there are all these personal bennies that are going to, compromise your coverage, as opposed to we expect and understand a bias in coverage of whoever you support. We expect that and we want that, right? We want to hear your perspective. You don't just want some like neutral, whatever. You could just go to somebody boring like a Wolf Blitzer for that, right? We don't need that. So there's a huge difference. And so the former is fine and what he's always done. The latter, I'm personally not okay with. I think that is just, it does end up compromising your coverage because now you have somebody who is getting these personal bennies, and that's going to impact your coverage in a negative way because now you're having her officiate your wedding. Are you driving in a limousine? Are you drinking expensive champagne? Like, what exactly is going on? You know what I'm saying? So I think that it's bad. And so, some people coming to the defense saying Kyle is a commentator, not a journalist. Kyle doesn't purport to be neutral. Again, so it's like we're going to get a lot of straw men here. I noticed Kyle's audience does this a lot. Like there's a lot of straw men going on, right? Like a lot, which is disappointing. I thought they would be, more intelligent, but so what? There's so many independent commentators on the web. It doesn't matter if one chooses to be a booster of a candidate. Collins said he has a bias, but he lets you know what it is. He also says he's a commentator, not a journalist, so he's not pretending to be objective or neutral. If you're hoping to follow the channel of someone highly critical of Marianne Williamson, believe me, there's no shortage of things for you to watch. So again, there's no issue. Nobody's taking issue with him saying, hey, I support Marianne Williamson. The issue becomes when you start to become so buddy-buddy with them, you develop this kind of weird connection that comes with a lot of its own personal benefits. You're riding around with the presidential candidate. It comes with media coverage, probably expensive private dinners, this kind of elitism sense that comes with it, this sense of like, a grandeur sense that comes. A lot of people just want power and they just want like kind of designation and like that kind of thing. And so there's that kind of aspect alone to it of like, oh, hey, I'm at a private dinner drinking expensive champagne with a presidential candidate, right? That's a big deal. For vast majority of the population, people just want to feel like they're something because everyone's just so like desperate for that kind of like self-feeling, right? And so I'm not surprised that Kyle's audience is doing this because they do this all the time. And so no, again, like nobody cared that Kyle was obviously supportive of Bernie Sanders. No one cared. But if Kyle all of a sudden was like riding around with Bernie and he's like initiating his wedding or whatever, and he's like doing all this buddy buddy, it does compromise it because now you're getting all these personal bennies that come with it that are going to compromise your coverage. And so I would say it doesn't completely like destroy his coverage or anything, but it does cheapen it for sure, at least somewhat. But I am curious to hear you guys' thoughts on this.